you for joining us on this webinar this morning. Delighted to have the opportunity to speak about educating with compassion and flexibility. Hopefully you find the information today to be relevant for the work that you're doing, whether it's in a consultative role or direct treatment or education of individual students, perhaps in your own life as well. This is actually the second webinar that we're providing. The first webinar that I gave about a month or so ago was on specifically emotional regulation, impairment strategies and supports. And that was recorded as well. And delighted to be able to provide supports and strategies that you might be able to find that are helpful to help you to really get to the heart of the challenges that encompass educating individuals with significant emotional, behavioral, and social deficits. So while we won't be focusing per se on specific strategies in this specific webinar in terms of improving emotional regulation impairment directly, there'll be a great deal of support in terms of indirectly addressing that, and more in terms of the educator, the mental health provider, the consultant, BCBA, psychologist, social worker, teacher, assistant, so that they can be in the best position to be able to assist and educate individuals who have emotional regulation impairment. Without further ado, what is compassion? So if we think about compassion, we'll be talking about kind of the gauge or meter of compassion. We could define compassion simply as kindness and caring, a willingness to help others. So I know it's an early morning here, and you may not have been thinking that you'd be doing any kind of therapy yourself. And while this isn't really therapy, I am going to ask you to do a little bit of insight. So this is for your own eyes. Of course, we're not in a shared space here where we're actually in person where others would see what you're writing anyway. What I'd like you to do is on a separate blank piece of paper. If you don't have any paper, perhaps you pull out a smartphone just for this particular activity. And I want you to write down the rest of the sentence that is underlined. When I think about a student or family member that I really care about, I've been struggling because, and go ahead and write in what would be the rest of that sentence. When I think about a student or family member that I really care about, I've been struggling because, go ahead and describe and write down what is the reason for the struggle. Once you've done that, fold up that piece of paper, tuck it away in your pocket, your wallet, your pocketbook, somewhere. Again, it's just for your own eyes, and we're going to reflect back on that sometime later in the webinar. What about burnout? Burnout is very closely aligned to something we're going to talk about in a moment called compassion fatigue. But if this looks like you, particularly here as we're closing in on the end of May, closing in on the end of the year, and getting near the end of this pandemic with restrictions, although we know it's an endemic, but are you experiencing exhaustion emotionally, physically, headaches, stomach aches? Do you feel sort of cynical about the work situation? Is your creativity impacted? Has your performance been impacted? Your motivation, your overall energy level? If you're sitting there and kind of nodding your head to a lot of these, that may be a sign of burnout. So what is stressful for us collectively as educators, behavior analysts, mental health professionals, parents, consultants? Juggling a busy schedule, perhaps? Advocating for students' needs regardless of your position? Adhering to best practices and the challenges that may go along with that, particularly in light of the restrictions we've been experiencing across the board? Effectively collaborating, communicating with families and coworkers and other professionals? Attending to your own needs and family and friends, your well-being emotionally, physically. Has this shown up for you at all over the last year and a half, or over the last week, or perhaps even this morning? I can't do this. Like, I can't get out of bed. I can't go for that morning run. I can't deal with this student or this coworker for one more day. The drive is way too long. This person is just too difficult to work with. There's too much uncertainty in this world, in my life, in this job, at this school. What if I don't do a good job? Maybe even bordering on imposter syndrome. I'm not as smart as others think I am, really getting at the heart of that imposter syndrome. What about stress? And of course, this has changed to some degree over the last year, but we know that the top cause of stress in the US historically has been job pressures, particularly coworker tension, bosses work overload, and you see money, health, relationships. Yes, it's fair to say over the last year, anything really associated with COVID-19 pandemic would be at the top in terms of stress. We see this across mental health practices. We see this in schools, that there's a significant increase in stress level and referrals for mental health services, significantly greater than what we've seen in the past. But we know that all of these factors are significantly contributing to stress. So if we think about the connection with COVID, those job pressures that are associated with that, the money that's associated with loss of income or time away, or how am I going to manage all of this? Our emotional and physical health, particularly as it relates to COVID restrictions and not being among friends and family related to relationships, the next one. How are we eating? How well are we cooking for ourselves over the last year? The media overload, I think we can all relate to that. And how has our sleep been impacted? So percent of people who regularly experience physical symptoms caused by stress, about 3/4 of people, right? And easily we could say that number has increased over the last year, the percentage of people experiencing physical indications of stress. Psychological symptoms pretty close behind, 73%. And we see money as a leading cause of stress. About 3/4 of people would cite that as well. So what's pretty fair to say is that most people experience stress at some point. Most people experience stress in some of those areas that include physical and psychological stress. And about half the people surveyed would say that stress has had some negative impact on their personal and professional life, impacting their work, family responsibilities. It's contributing to problems in their family, perhaps in a marriage or other significant relationship, perhaps impacting them in the workplace. So we know that there has been an increase, unfortunately, in abusive situations, domestic abuse over the last year. We know there's been an increase in the number of family strife that's occurred, and child abuse that's occurred, particularly with individuals being at home, stuck at home. There's been an increased level of really stressful situations that has impacted families, let alone the impact on social relationships with peers and impact on the educational functioning of students. So if we look at, this goes back July 2020, and I imagine we'll have some updated press releases as well, that the pandemic related stress holds steady, but feelings of fear, frustration, anger are rising. Where are we right now? I haven't seen the most recent stress related press release that would give us an updated survey, but we know that it has really impacted us in so many different ways. As we get back to a new normal, perhaps it's related and similar to the old normal, we don't really know, but we know that for sure that coronavirus, the pandemic, has significantly impacted us. And a year ago, talking about long-lasting effects, and we're still seeing this. And with students returning to school, some of whom are returning for the first time in person, some who are in a hybrid or fully remote are returning in person, some staff members that were not in person returning to in person. We're anticipating we're going to see separation anxiety issues and greater generalized anxiety disorder symptoms, talking about students, but we can certainly anticipate that for staff, there is an increase and will be a continued increase in anxiety and overall stress related to return to school. And what does that look like? Return to work in whatever capacity, and how that impacts family trying to work with that. A big part of it is because we care, and we hurt where we care where we hurt. So the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training, ACT, Dr. Stephen Hayes, an area of what we call third wave cognitive behavior therapy, similar to mindfulness components. DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, was also a third wave cognitive behavior therapy. Dr. Hayes says we hurt where we care where we hurt. So if you simply think about it like this, if you didn't care, if it didn't matter to you, you wouldn't experience that stress and that discomfort and that pain. And there probably wouldn't be any struggle. There wouldn't be any of the proverbial pulling of the ropes and a tug of war internally that you might be experiencing as we've been going through this last year and change, and as we're continuing to move forward. And the stress that you experienced even before the pandemic was even a thing. And moving forward, what does that look like? One of the main components that I really want to convey as we go through this morning is that stress is universal. We all experience stress. However, and most importantly, we don't have to struggle. Through having self-compassion and compassion toward others, we can actually make a choice not to struggle. We may not be able to make a choice about whether or not we're experiencing stress or that there are stressful events in our life, especially when we care about things. Yet what we can do is make some choices about how we respond to and experience that stress so that we can avoid the struggle and not struggle. So if we had a better way, right, of managing our emotions, navigating through that, would you choose to do so? Knowing that you can't choose the stressors that enter your life, and you can choose, however, how we respond to that. Why is this important? Why is educating with compassion important? So whatever your role may be, whatever has landed you in the field of education fairly broadly, probably we've thought about that caring and compassion is related to that. Yet educating individual students is challenging. And when we're educating individuals that have developmental delays, significant emotional regulation impairment, such as behavioral issues, significant social emotional learning deficits, now we've really upped the ante. It's significantly more challenging in most cases to become effective in our respective roles. Therefore, what comes along with that when we're really caring and wanting to improve the lives and educational progress of individuals who have significant areas of deficiency? Probably more stress. So if we can learn to become what we refer to as psychologically flexible, it's much more involved than what a growth mindset is, which is often used in the field of education. And we'll be talking about what it means to be psychologically flexible. But if we can become psychologically flexible and compassionate, that can be significantly empowering and help you to be much more effective in your role as an educator. So instead of seeing what looks like a maze and we're not sure where to begin, unsure how to get out of it, just like in a corn maze, we can kind of take this journey together, find a path that's going to be less cumbersome and able to navigate that toward what's meaningful to us and what we care about. If you're pulling your hair out like this woman, if your office looks like that on particular days, then you know right where it is and you know exactly what that stress is like. You can experience it. There's sort of that visceral response. So burnout is a special type of stress that educators, that caregivers, that professionals, that any and all of us may experience, right? But burnout includes a sense of sort of that reduced sense and feeling of accomplishment, wondering whether or not I'm really even effective anymore doing what matters to me, what's meaningful to me. It may contribute to physically, emotional exhaustion at various times, and then wanting to pull away and withdraw from the situation and from people because I'm completely overwhelmed with this level of stress that I'm experiencing related to the work that I'm doing. It certainly is commonly associated with an increased workload and institutional stress, not specifically trauma related. So we're not talking about a trauma that occurred in an individual's life or an individual's workplace, but that increased workload and stress. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be concretely, clearly an increased workload. It could be the perception of an increased level of workload, especially, for example, individuals who are going back to education who are now full day, where previously it was 2/3 of a day or 3/4 of a day. So the workload is actually similar to what was experienced prior to the pandemic and prior to the restrictions. However, we've had this new normal of, well, we're going to start at a certain time and end 2/3 into the day. And now it's going to be a full day. My gosh, that actually is significantly greater in terms of the workload than we had 16 months ago or 2 years ago. Compassion fatigue, characterized by, again, that physical and emotional exhaustion, just like we talk about with burnout. It also contributes to a significant decrease in our ability to empathize, to really understand, put myself in your shoes, imagine how you're feeling, to be able to share the feelings of others, which of course is critical in our role if we're working with individual students, and especially working with individuals who have an emotional regulation impairment. It's sometimes referred to as a secondary traumatic stress. So in our efforts and our goal and our journey to help others, or desiring to help others who are in need in various ways, that we are experiencing this sort of fatigue where, if you imagine similar to the gas gauge in your car, and that's going down, you see it going down, the fuel is going down. Well, that's a problem, obviously, if you're on empty. With our compassion, if we think about that gauge as well, that gauge is going down and nearing empty or is at empty, we've hit that proverbial wall, and it's really hard to recover quickly and to come back for that. And unfortunately, we refer to this as the unwanted cost of caring so much for others, particularly when stress is contributing to that. So it's not that we don't want to show compassion, it's that we've been giving so much of ourselves to others that it gets in the way of our ability and our motivation at times to be successful at demonstrating that level of compassion and empathy continuously. And for those who need it the most, those individual students who sort of show it in the worst ways when they need help and they need loving and caring, they often show it through challenging behavior and challenging emotional reactions. They need our compassion more than others. Yet if our level of compassion is moving toward that empty side, or it is at the empty point, it's much harder for us to put ourselves in a position where we're continually showing that level of empathy and that caring that's going to make a meaningful difference. So are compassion fatigue and burnout the same? So while people would tend to equate the two, they are slightly different. So burnout typically is slower to develop over a period of time. So you might just sort of like experience that, whoa, where did that come from? Now I'm feeling burned out, right? That there's been this gradual, a compilation of stress that's occurring, and now I'm starting to feel burnout. But compassion fatigue may have a bit more of an unexpected onset, perhaps maybe even without any warning signs. Like you wake up one day or come back from the long weekend or after a particular meeting and you feel spent. Where did it go? Where's my empathy? The path may also be less predictable, whereas burnout, you might say, all right, I've got a weekend off, or I'm going to go out with some friends, or I'm going to go for a nice run or long walk or take a bath, and okay, that'll help me, and now I'm not as burned out. Whereas the compassion fatigue sets in a little bit longer, a little bit harder to recover from that. And as it says at the bottom, it may take weeks or even years for it to develop. It may take quite a bit of time to recover from that. So it's really significantly important for all of us to be mindful of that, to safeguard against it, and to know what are some of the strategies that we can do so that we can be more compassionate without losing it or hitting that wall. And if we hit that wall, how can we start to recover from that to be in a better position to show compassion? So when that's eroding, it makes it much more difficult for us to respond and to quote unquote be the educator, be the mental health provider, be the BCBA, be the teacher or the assistant that we've always wanted to be. So with the pandemic, we know that we're seeing a greater level of this, more compassion fatigue, more burnout. For sure, we see this with frontline workers who are dealing emotionally and physically, unfortunately, with individuals that have suffered significant loss. significant physical complications as related to COVID, families that are struggling with this. So the closer we are, the more tightly connected we are with individuals that are struggling with some area themselves, the more one is prone to be experiencing compassion fatigue themselves, which is why we commonly do see it among caregivers and educators who are working with individuals that have significant needs. In fact, it can be referred to as a serious occupational hazard. And a majority of those in what we refer affectionately as this helping profession, okay, are likely to experience it at some point in your life. Identifying and knowing that is important because sometimes we may say, oh, it's burnout, so I'll go take a break and come back. However, if you haven't necessarily changed your outlook, your mindset, what your thoughts and feelings are associated with the situation, then the burnout doesn't go away, especially if it is more of the compassion fatigue that has been evolving over a period of time. So as it says, it's no surprise that typically those with the most empathy are those who are most at risk. That is, for you sitting here, if you're someone who is immensely caring and compassionate and connected with those among whom you work, you're more prone, more at risk for developing compassion fatigue and burnout. Simply because you care a heck of a lot, you're in a greater position to be experiencing some of these occupational hazards associated with that. Not surprisingly, significant research meta-analysis found what? That an increased self-compassion is associated with lower levels of mental health symptoms. So really understanding the compassion with yourself is going to be associated with better mental health and lower mental health issues. Conversely, what happens? Well, we see if you don't have as strong self-compassion, it's going to be associated with higher issues, higher psychopathology. So when we're more self-compassionate, we have a more positive attitude, a better mood overall. We're going to see less depression and anxiety. We're going to be in a much better situation to be able to mitigate against some of those more significant stressors that are going to be showing up at some point in our lives. So if we want to minimize, the onset of compassion fatigue, let's have an awareness of the risk factors. So while we're not going to go through the survey or the questionnaire per se, you can click on goodtherapy.org and you can learn a bit more about the risk factors and sort of go through and say, well, do I have some of those? Here's a quick checklist for now. And just be mindful of whether you experience or display any of these. Irritability, anxiety, agitation. What about frustration or anger? Do you feel disconnected, sort of depersonalized? You've lost that connection, whether it's related to COVID or not. This is not about making excuses or explaining why. Is the reality that I feel disconnected and fatigued and frustrated? Do I feel like I don't have as much empathy and understanding and sympathy for others? Do I have more of sort of chronic fatigue? I'm always feeling tired. I don't have my energy physically, emotionally. Do I seem disinterested? Oh, I don't care. Apathy, has that set in? Particularly related to those for whom we are supposed to be or intended to provide that support. So if you notice that you checked off some of those, then you're probably experiencing some of those indicators of compassion fatigue. If it was a fair amount, if not most of those, you're probably, unfortunately, pretty far along of experiencing a fair degree of compassion fatigue. So as they say with most issues, having an awareness, noticing, acknowledging it is probably a really first important critical step so that we can start to make some changes. Here are some others. Insomnia, headache, loss of appetite, weight loss. So some of those physical or psychological or physiological issues. What about relationship issues? And what about feeling overall, I'm unfulfilled in your role as a caregiver, as an educator, as a professional? Do you feel like I'm not really making the kind of meaningful difference that's important to me in my life? And therefore my life is not feeling as fulfilled anymore. So as you become aware of that, and you'll see this on the goodtherapy.org site, the professional quality of life scale, it's going to allow you to rate yourself on the scale of 1 to 10. And you can do that weekly. You can just do it a one-time, off. But my suggestion is take a look at that. See where you are. Measure yourself again a month from now. Perhaps even just have it as a prompt that's on your calendar to check in to see what your temperature is in terms of your level of compassion fatigue. What signs and symptoms am I experiencing? In the workplace, I would certainly encourage your particular respective workplace to have some supports, some mental health awareness, making colleagues aware of this, making family members aware of this so that we can be in a better position to ward that off or to move in a better direction. So what if discomfort and stress are a fact of life? Well, I've already told you it is a fact of life, although I don't think you needed me to say that. But if it is true, and it is, then undoubtedly we're all going to be experiencing discomfort and stress and self-doubt and fatigue and fear. And if you're familiar with that Chinese finger trap and you put your fingers in and now you're trying to get your fingers out, well, what happens when you start to pull the fingers out? It gets tighter and tighter and tighter. So we get caught in this situation. And what our instincts tell us? The fight, flight, freeze response. I want to get out of this. I need to remove myself from the situation. And usually those attempts to eliminate, to get rid of discomfort, to eliminate and get rid of stress, they're sort of doomed to fail. We're trying to change and get rid of stress, yet stress is a fact of life. For most of us, trying to continually problem solve to get rid of our stress is not terribly successful. Now, mind you, if you do find that, hey, I'm driving along and a log is on the road and I can move the log or I can drive around and go around it or go a different direction, by all means, problem solve and do that. However, when you realize that that log is showing up, whatever direction I go, whatever road I'm on, however I try to navigate that, then probably what I need to do is I need to go through this. But what I can actually do is I can take that log and I can use that as fuel for my fire that really gets me going in my life and what's important to me. And I'm going to take that with me instead of trying to get rid of it. And that's the fundamental difference, is that when we use stress and discomfort that shows up as a way to help us to move forward, instead of allowing it to get in our way and really take us off our path. So it's much more meaningful and effective, and we have more flexibility when we notice that the stressors that show up because I care about something. Most likely, as we're talking about this morning, the children for whom we're trying to support and educate, the coworkers who are present in our lives, and the families of those individuals for whom we're trying to provide education. When stress shows up related to those situations, yes, we could avoid work, we could avoid those people, we could leave the profession, and effectively probably avoid the discomfort and stress associated with that situation. And you know what's next. Wherever you land in the next position, it's going to be only some time before there's some discomfort and stress. Why? Because that's part of life. Yet we get to make that choice about what's our relationship with that stress and discomfort. And am I going to try to eliminate it or to do something different? Are you in this hole and you're looking up and all you want to do is to get out of this hole and waiting for somebody to come along with this beautiful golden shovel that, gosh, with the promise of, hey, use this shovel, it'll get you out of the hole. And hopefully it doesn't take you too long. You're realizing I'm digging and digging and digging. Lo and behold, I'm not getting out of this hole. What am I doing? You know the answer. I'm digging myself deeper and deeper in this hole with no signs of getting out. So how do I want to be? Analyzing why I got in the hole doesn't really work. What about if I avoid those holes? Well, I won't go there. I won't do this. I won't talk to that person. I won't show up for that meeting. I won't go to this webinar. I won't present at that meeting. I won't prepare for this. I won't speak with this student. How well is that working for you, right? What are you missing out on? So attempts to avoid those holes and those pitfalls and the stressors usually leads to us missing out on a lot of things that we care about and matter to us. Spending our time analyzing why we're in the hole, again, how well is that working? And trying to dig yourself out by just doing the same thing over and over and over again, you have to look and see, is that working? What about blaming people, blaming life? You got me in this hole. It's my fault. Life got me in this hole. How well is that working? So what we often talk about in the field is Is what you're trying to do helpful or not helpful? Are the thoughts helpful or not helpful? If you keep doing the same thing, over and over again, you're expecting to get different results. Well, it's not the best of terms, but that's, as we would affectionately say, the definition of insanity. I'm wanting something different to happen, and I'm doing the same thing. Why isn't something different happening? Maybe I need to actually turn the tides and start doing something different. Part of that is realizing, noticing, and accepting this is not about winning. This is not about beating the stress and winning over that. Again, it's more about stopping the struggling. So the reality is we're trying to turn off that struggle switch. So it's an on position. When the struggle switch is on, whenever something unpleasant is showing up, memories, thoughts, feelings, sensations, we're struggling. I want to get rid of it. It's like this tug of war. I'm on one cliff, the other person's on the, but it's really me, is on the other side of the cliff, and we're pulling and pulling and pulling. Is there really any winner when both sides are me? And what am I doing? I'm spending a lot of time struggling. What about if I turn that struggle switch into the off position? What about if whenever that discomfort or stress shows up, that I notice, I'm willing to experience it? Yes, there's a lot of mindfulness connected with that. And I look at and acknowledge and move toward what I care about while taking that stress with me. Going for a morning run while my foot hurts, while the weather is hot and humid, or while it's snowing, while it's raining, while I'm tired, while I'm not feeling it. I have a choice, right? I can lay in bed and then not experience that discomfort. Or I can get out of bed and go for that run while experiencing that discomfort. Same thing with education. Same thing with whatever your role may be, personally, professionally. I can make a choice to avoid all of that, and then I don't have to struggle with that. And what am I missing out on? I can make a choice to struggle with that. How well is that working? Or I can make a choice to move forward, noticing that there's stuff that's uncomfortable, but I'm not going to start battling. I'm not going to struggle with it. I'm going to choose to run while noticing I've got some discomfort. I'm going to choose to show up in my classroom, show up in my school building, do my best to consult, to lead, to case manage, to evaluate, to educate, to support, even though ... whatever it is that's showing up. Easier said than done, for sure. That's why there are, in fact, whole realms of significant research that are exploring this whole idea of psychological flexibility. Mentioned ACT a few minutes ago. The major goal of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, acceptance and commitment training, is not about getting rid of the stress, but rather helping us to move in the direction toward what matters to us, living a fulfilling life, a meaningful life, however you define that, which is actually the cool thing. You get to decide what matters to you. Your students, your children, significant others, your friends, your family, they get to decide as well what matters to them. We can certainly help people along the path, but we all get to decide what matters. As I mentioned, Dr. Hayes, pictured there, founded acceptance and commitment therapy. In fact, and he's written a wonderful recent book. He's the author of dozens and dozens of books and hundreds of articles. In a liberated mind, his goal was really to bring the notion of acceptance and commitment therapy and psychological flexibility to the forefront in a more generalized approach rather than just scientifically. So I really would recommend checking out his book. And he has a fabulous TED Talk. So Dr. Hayes, interestingly enough, struggled with panic disorder as a young professor and professional. And he was at his lowest point in 1981. And you can see and hear it and almost experience it in his TED Talk, which really led to his discovery of a different way of approaching stress, rather than trying to change stress, rather than trying to get rid of stress, rather than trying to change our thoughts and emotions, more about changing our relationship with stress and our thoughts and feelings, so that we can actually turn toward that pain and suffering. When historically, what are we wanting to do? We're wanting to flee from it, move away from that especially when we feel cornered. We can actually move toward what we fear the most and not miss out on life, but be more engaged. So ACT, which we'll talk a little bit about, emphasizes the process of mindfulness, acceptance, and values. And again, it's people's attempts to control or avoid their own painful experiences that actually leads to long-term suffering. So think about that. Attempts to try to get rid of that which is uncomfortable contributes to struggles, which contributes to lifelong suffering. That's not a new concept, by the way. That's been around for years and years and years. Helping individuals, ourselves included, to be more flexible, to be able to live our lives that are meaningful, but to be able to change our approach to it and our ability to accept those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. That's what's going to really help to make a substantial difference, allow us to be more compassionate. So the goal here is we're not directly trying to achieve symptom reduction. What does that mean? For ourselves, our clients, we're not trying to, our students, we're not trying to get rid of anxiety. We're not trying to get rid of depression. Yes, I know, call up, email, Dr. Selbst, yes, I really want to be treated. I want to get rid of my anxiety. I want to get rid of my depression. Okay, let's take them on as a client. However, you can bet that I'm going to be clear that we are not going to be focusing on getting rid of your depression or anxiety. However, I certainly do hope that you're going to be experiencing significantly less depression and anxiety over time. Our goal instead is going to be to help you to be living and identifying a more fulfilled life and taking steps to move in the direction of a more meaningful life while helping you to work through and change the relationship with all those stressors that show up because you care and the areas that you care. So we're going to work toward changing how you experience those stressors. So what does acceptance mean? And this can be a little bit confusing because some people look at this acceptance like, oh, I'm cool with it. That's fine. No, I accept COVID, or how could I possibly accept that, right? But really acceptance means that we're simply at its basis, at its core, noticing all the thoughts and feelings when they show up, noticing, being aware of those with all of our senses, having awareness when they show up and fully allowing ourselves to experience it. Have you ever had any kind of physical pain or discomfort, right? And there's a lot of different ways that you can be with that. You can be crying genuinely, complaining, struggling, suffering with great agony. Or you can notice the significant physical discomfort and make a choice about getting up out of your bed, walking around, moving around, exercising, icing or using heat, whatever is recommended, showing up at the PT or the OT, engaging in some mindfulness work, engaging in the work and other areas that matter to you, instead of laying there struggling, wishing, praying that it's going to go away. If that works, then wonderful. But most people don't find that our struggles just go away. So the acceptance is about not rejecting the reality of the situation. Okay. So think about this for a moment. Do you ever try to avoid feeling worried, feeling scared, feeling angry, feeling embarrassed? Do you ever put yourself in that position where you're trying to not think about anything unpleasant? I'll deal with that later. I'll brush it under the rug. Don't talk to me about that now. I just can't think about that. We've all experienced that. What about thinking unpleasant thoughts about others? You try to avoid that as well. So the key here is we want to get unhooked. Sir Winston Churchill says, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. It's kind of like Rocky says, right? It's not how many times you get knocked down, but how many times you get up. We're human. We make mistakes. You need to unhook yourself from, I can't do it. Like, I can't raise my hand. I can't raise my hand. I can't raise my hand. All the while, what am I doing? I'm raising my hand. How many times do you or your students say, I can't do this? It's such a classic, right? Or I'm bored. I'm lousy. I'm stupid. almost like the scarlet letter that we've got right across our chest. It says, look, do you see what it says? I am stupid. Look, everybody can see it. I am stupid. I am lousy. I am no good. I am broken. So unhooking ourselves from those thoughts is one of the critical pieces to move toward compassion, self-compassion, and helping our students to do the same. Noticing that what is it? It is just a thought. I'm not minimizing the significance of those thoughts because those thoughts get in the way and they really do impact us. However, am I going to let that thought drive me, take me for the walk where it wants to go, or am I going to be the one that's taking my thoughts for the walk? I'm the one that gets to choose. How many times did you have to fall over before you learn to walk? You've seen a baby do that, right? You've seen the baby go through 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, 14 months of age. They get up, they fall. They get up, they fall. They get up, they fall. Really, is the 10, 12-month-year-old baby saying, I don't know whether I should do this again. Maybe I'll just give up. No, right? In fact, they don't really truly have those cognitive skills developed where they're going to engage in that level of self-doubt. They get right back up again and they keep going, right? How many times did you drop a ball before you caught it? How many times did you try driving before you got it, right? You were persistent. Although sometimes people aren't. Some people will avoid that. How well does that work out? Avoiding things that you might care about because I don't think it'll work out well, or it's not working out well. So it's critical for us to be able to be self-compassionate. We have to be able to show self-care, and we need to unhook ourselves from those thoughts and feelings that are taking us down that path to where we're unsuccessful. Really great movie from some years back, City Slickers. Great in terms of just some really cool humor. Billy Crystal and his buddies, they go, city folks go to out to the country for, I forget if it's a weekend or a week, and they meet Jack Palance, who's sort of your prototypical cowboy, and he's got it all. He's the cool guy, and he sort of knows everything. And Billy Crystal is out there riding along with Jack Palance, and this is a scene just before Jack Palance's character dies in the movie.
Do you know what the secret of life is?
No, what?
This.
Your finger?
One thing. Just one thing.
That's great, but what's the one thing?
That's what you gotta figure out.
So after that scene, Jack Palance passes away, or his character passes away. So aside from the humor there, so Billy Crystal is just really wanting to understand the meaning of life and what he learns as well. It's just one thing, but it's for him to figure that out, as it is for all of us. So what we care about, what our values are really truly are big M&Ms, right, in the behavioral field. But it's really what is our heart's deepest desires? What do we care about more than anything? What matters to us more than anything? What's most important? Okay. It's not about what you want to get. It's not about a specific goal, but what's the path and direction and journey that you want to be moving toward? And we're continuously moving in that direction. So sampling of values here of what matters to you, whether it's enjoyment and education, lifelong learning, whether it's relationships, whether it's your community and your family, whether it's your health, emotional, physical well-being. Got lots of different areas. So this battery exercise, and if you didn't hear it earlier when Denise mentioned it, that the PowerPoint will be made available to all participants after today. So just wanted to repeat that. So you'll see this batteries exercise, or you can go to the site you see at the bottom left as an example. But this is a way where we can just kind of do a check-in, and we're going to look at as we go around the clock, either clockwise or counterclockwise, and we can put in a little rating of how important each of these areas is in our life. We can do this with some modifications with students getting at their value system. So we can talk about how important it is. And then secondly, how good a job have you been doing? How successful have you been with living your life in a spiritual way, living your life the way you'd like to in intimate relationships? How successful have you been in living your life in terms of your career and your work? So you might value career as a 10 in terms of importance, but perhaps it's only a 2 in terms of how fulfilled you feel. Maybe health related activities are a 10 and you're at a 6 or 7. Both would be an indication that, hey, I care a lot about my work and career, and I care a lot about my health and so forth. However, I'm so far from feeling fulfilled. I'm so far away from that bullseye, and that's upsetting. And I'm struggling with that. So I'm going to lay in bed and I'm not going to get out. But when I feel better, I'll get out of bed. Oh yeah? When's that happening? And sort of the sadness becomes despair, becomes greater depression, becomes even greater depression, and now we're pulled away from everything. And when I feel better, then I'll start to engage again. Oh yeah? Again, how well is that working? It's not until we start to make the steps toward that are we showing greater self-compassion and starting to live a more meaningful life. So how do we start to move in that direction? Well, we need to notice those unpleasant thoughts, feelings, and memories. So I say to kids often and to adults, what about that stinking thinking, right? I didn't make up the phrase. It's not all that novel, but the stinking thinking. So I can't do this. I'm no good at this. I'm lousy. I'm stupid. I'll never be good. What will people think? I don't know whether I'll be successful. So notice that that's happening. What do you do with that, Mike? Well, just notice it. Really? I don't need to manipulate it. I don't need to change it. I don't need to get rid of it. I don't need to challenge it. Nope. Just notice it. It's there. Sometimes we'll sort of have like the puppet. Okay, it's an extension of me. It's my mind chattering. That's what my mind does. My mind talks, just like my mind might say, oh, I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. It's sunny out. It's raining out. It's cloudy out. It's snowing. The trees are moving. The squirrels are moving. Our minds chatter. Included in that is self-doubt. Included in that is beating ourselves up with thoughts and feelings. So notice that. What am I willing to experience? So ask yourself this. What am I willing to experience as an educator, a parent, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, whatever your role may be, however you may define yourself, whatever matters to you, what are you willing to experience? A runner, a walker, a swimmer, a bike rider, a leader, a teacher, BCBA, social worker, nurse, etc. What am I willing to experience as I keep moving toward what matters to me? Because you can bet stuff's going to show up. That stinking thinking's going to show up. For some people, it may actually be better to avoid the word acceptance and maybe say something like, you don't have to like it. You don't have to want it. You don't even have to approve it. Just simply allow it to be there. It already is there. Give it permission to be where it is already. You ever hear of that song by the Beatles? Let It Be? I think they knew something about mindfulness and acceptance before it sort of became a thing, at least as broad as it is. Make peace with it. Stop fighting with it. Letting go of the struggle. Let down the rope, like in the tug of war. Make room for it. Stop wasting your energy on pushing it away. So these may be some really helpful tips for yourself, and in turn, keying it with staff and students. So acceptance is not about, hey, I'm cool with it, but rather it's here. I'm noticing it. I'm not going to deny the reality of what is already here. I'm going to make room for it because it's already in the room. Take a look at this video by Russ Harris, who's another one of the prolific leaders in the area of acceptance commitment therapy. I think this really epitomizes how we can get caught up with trying to get rid of our thoughts and feelings and what that costs us instead of allowing them to come there because they're already there.
Imagine one day you decide to throw a party for all your friends. You get out your phone and you start inviting people. You want a really big party, so you say, anyone can come. And on the big day, you get your place ready for the party. And you're really excited to see everyone. And pretty soon, the guests all start arriving. After a while, everyone you're expecting has arrived and you're having a really good time. But then the doorbell goes, and you think, I wonder who that is. Must be someone I've forgotten about. And it is. Someone who you definitely did not want. Brian. Brian has to be one of the most annoying people you know. He's rude, grumpy, he moans a lot, and he's not so flash on personal hygiene. He's the last person you want at your party. But before you know it, he goes straight inside without even saying hello. And he goes up to your guests and he's rude. He helps himself to drinks and food. And he generally acts a little weird towards your friends. And understandably, you feel pretty upset, embarrassed and angry. And before long, you go over to Brian and tell him, that's it, it's time for you to go. And you throw him out of your party. Once he's gone, you feel relieved. You go back to the party and start to enjoy yourself. But after a while, you hear the doorbell again. And when you go to check who it is, you realize Brian has come back. And before you can stop him, he opens the door and races back into the party. So you go out and get him and throw him out again. This time though, you decide you're going to make sure he doesn't come back. So you decide to stand by the door and make sure he can't get back in. And this works fine. Brian can't get back in and you feel good about this. Trouble is, you realize that all the while you're missing out on the party. You can hear everyone else outside having a good time. You want to be out at the party too. But because you can't stand Brian, you can't risk him coming back in again. And you don't know what to do. You really want to enjoy the party, but the thought of Brian being there really gets to you. After a while, you realize that, actually, this party is pretty important to you, and you want to be with your friends, at the very least just to make sure they're okay. So you decide to go back out, and you say to yourself, if Brian comes out, that's how it goes. And sure enough, after a couple of minutes, Brian comes back in and starts being annoying again. But this time something's different. You don't ignore him, because he's pretty hard to ignore, but you decide just to get on with the party and talk with your friends, and you start to notice some interesting things. First, you find that even though Brian is still there, you're actually having an okay time. Sure, it'd be better if he went home, but at least you're not stuck at the door, missing out on the party. Second, you notice that when you're not trying to get rid of him all the time, he calms down a little bit. He's still a pain and still smells, but he's not so rowdy. And then after that, you start to notice some other things about Brian you hadn't actually seen before. Like that he has a quirky sense of humour, even though it's buried pretty deep. And he even makes a couple of friends of yours laugh. And you wonder to yourself, what will you do next time you have a party?
So hopefully as you're watching that, you could relate to some area in your life where you're trying to keep those demons out. You're trying to keep those thoughts and those uncomfortable feelings out. And you have some realization that it's cost you something. That while trying to guard that proverbial door, it's precluded you from being able to engage in life and precluded you from being able to really be the kind of person that you want to be and how you want to be. And that self-care and that self-compassion and that psychological flexibility, as we can call it different names, allows us to notice the smelly, annoying Brian that shows up, even though we don't want it to do. Allows it to be there because it's going to end up showing up anyway. And if our attempts are made to focus on getting rid of it and not allowing it in, then we end up missing out on the party in our life and what matters to us. So we can choose self-care as one way to start to engage more and to show more self-compassion. Consider someone or something you care about. So think about what toward behaviors or away behaviors, moving toward what you care about, what matters to you, and what away behaviors that is moving away from what's uncomfortable. What does that cost you? How has it impacted you? You can choose self-care, for example, as a toward move, to move toward that person in a way that you care about. While today is not fully a day to give complete education of what acceptance and commitment therapy is or deep into mindfulness, I want to at least give you some tip of the iceberg about what the ACT matrix is. And no, it's not the same as the movie The Matrix, although the authors, the founders of the ACT matrix, Kevin Polk and his colleagues, really liked the movie The Matrix. So they called it the ACT matrix, or acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance commitment training matrix. What you see in the bottom right, which is a good place to start for many individuals, is what's in your heart, what matters to you, who and what is meaningful to you. So if you can answer that question, and in turn, ultimately, if we can go through this ACT matrix with children, as I've done countless times, children, adolescents, adults, in individual therapy sessions, in group therapy sessions, in classrooms, I've done this many, many times. Let's individually explore what matters to you, who matters to you. And that bottom part of this matrix here, below that horizontal line, is what's on the inside. What am I experiencing on the inside? Who and what matters to me? What kind of educator do you want to be? A caring, supportive, responsible, reliable change maker. All the while, by the way, the yellow circle in the middle, taking that bird's eye view, the 360 view, the helicopter view of watching down on myself, modifying, or I should say monitoring, noticing how I am, what I'm thinking, what I'm experiencing, how I want to be. And as we move toward the bottom right, as we move toward what matters to us and wanting to move toward, what shows up? The bottom left, the stinking thinking. What are the thoughts and feelings and images that show up? What's getting in the way of me being the kind of educator, the kind of psychologist, the kind of person, the professional that I want to be? What am I doing? So now we're getting to doing. That's the top part of the matrix here, above that horizontal line. What am I doing when I'm noticing that uncomfortable emotion, the discomfort, the stress that shows up? What have you been doing historically? What do you do to try to move away from those difficult emotions and to give yourself some relief? So we engage in behaviors. It could be sleeping, taking a mental health day, drinking, smoking, anger, so yelling at someone, avoiding people, procrastinating, avoiding situations. We do that as what? A short-term relief. It allows us to move away from the stress, and it's functional. It works, meaning short-term. What do our kids do? BCBAs, we can relate to this, right? They throw, they kick, they scream, they scratch, they spit, they throw. I said throw. They roll around on the floor. They refuse. They bite. They do whatever they can to move away from what? Discomfort. Because they didn't want to wait for something. They were told no, because they have trouble transitioning, because they have difficulty communicating what they want and what they don't want, because they want somebody's attention, because they don't want somebody's attention, because something feels uncomfortable, because something feels good. Boy, we just covered, I think, all of the functions of behavior. So basically, there's a lot of overlap, isn't there? That is, when people, including our students, they're people too, experience some uncomfortable situation, they tend to want to move away from that. And oftentimes we do that in ways that are not real helpful, although short-term they are. You're giving me a work demand. I don't want this. I kick you. Now you're no longer giving me the work demand, except sometimes we do, right? Sometimes we put behaviors on extinction. Sometimes we continue with that. Well, we don't really like it as an adult. If an adult's going to put that behavior on extinction, vacuum the room. No, you will vacuum the room no matter what, right? It doesn't work out real well with relationships. Adult student, that's a relationship. So we've got to think about compassionately how we cope with this, because the child is motivated to move away from discomfort, and adults are motivated to move away from discomfort. The student won't listen to me. My colleague won't listen to me. I'm not feeling successful. So the top left is about noticing the discomfort and our tendency to move away from discomfort, which probably just helps short term. The top right is really the direction we want to move, which is to move in directions that are going to allow us to engage in actions consistent with what we care about, even though it's uncomfortable. That's the essence of psychological flexibility. I can take with me what's in the bottom left. I can take with me the negative thoughts, the negative feelings, the negative emotions and images that are showing up because I care, and be willing to take them with me as I move toward what's important to me. That means, as a student, studying for that test, even though this is boring and I don't know if I'm going to do well and I don't care that much about calculus. That means working through this difficult assignment in class, even though this is difficult and I may feel embarrassed. That means the teacher showing up, even though they're feeling a bit disenchanted. Well, they've got to, of course, contact some reinforcement at some point, but be willing to move forward because ultimately I care, even though, gosh, right in the thick of it, this is difficult. So the psychological flexibility, again, is being willing to experience that discomfort so that I can move toward what matters to me. That's the essence of being compassionate. Moving forward, even though it's uncomfortable, is the essence of helping us to avoid compassion fatigue. We get caught in our compassion fatigue, or end up in compassion fatigue, when we keep giving and giving and giving, and that stinking thinking is there and it's showing up and showing up to the point where we're now just caught in the top left. I just need to move away and withdraw from all of this because this is so overwhelming. If you're thinking this is a little bit challenging, you got that right. We spend sessions just working on noticing each of the different 4 areas here and being a noticer of all of this and sorting, as we call it. Let's sort what's on the left side. Let's sort what's on the right side. So is that a toward behavior or an away behavior? There's a lot here. That's why I said in some degree, we're touching on the tip of the iceberg. Yet this is an education to at least raise our awareness about what can be and raise an awareness about what we're doing and what we're not doing and what our students are doing and not doing so that we can have greater compassion. We can take actions and actually move toward greater self-care. So what is good for present moment awareness? Notice that what you've been doing hasn't been working. Notice that that's been getting in the way of the kind of educator and caregiver and parent you want to be. Making a choice, hey, I'm going to do something different. I went to this workshop on Tuesday morning and I learned I don't have to let the thoughts get in the way. I can allow that Brian to come to my party, even though I don't want him to be there. Because if I keep him out, I'm missing out on the party. Maybe he'll be quieter, just like my thoughts. They won't be gone. They'll be quieter. And now they're in a much more workable position. They're not here. They're next to me. They're in my pocket, maybe. Committed action. What actions will I commit to moving forward? Well, what about some self-care? Because that's critical, emotionally and physically. What can you do? How can you increase that? Committing to that. How about physically? I choose to exercise in the treadmill. Here's when I'm going to do it. Daily, 6 o'clock, 30 minutes when I'm at home. Socially, I'm going to join my friends at breakfast. One Saturday, the first Saturday of each month, 9 o'clock for 2 hours at the local diner. We can go outside. Oh gosh, we can go inside now. We can do that, right? So I'm going to connect with my friends socially. Emotionally, I'm going to keep a reflective journal. Bedtime, I'm going to do it. After I get into my pajamas, before I brush my teeth, 5 minutes every day, I'm going to sit down and do a reflective journal. Could our students do any of all of these? Absolutely. Do they need more help? Absolutely. Right now, we're talking about you. We're talking about me. We're talking about how we as adults can put ourselves in a greater position to be more compassionate to help our students in turn. The workplace, I can consult with a colleague. I can plan to do that every Monday, 3:30, 15 minutes at work. That's when I'm going to do it. Keeping that journal, I can notice my thoughts. I'm having the thought that I'm noticing I'm having the thought. Or I can even say, hey, mind, thanks for telling me, right? Russ Harris says that a lot. So I could be running, right? And notice, hey, my legs are sore. Thanks for letting me know, mind, right? Well, I've got a choice. I'm 2 miles into it. I could stop or I could keep going. We're not talking about a major injury. We're talking about our minds noticing that something's uncomfortable. What do you want to do with that? What do you want to do about that? We can practice to even protect against or minimize compassion fatigue. So we can be more mindful in our eating, slow it down, right? Our exercise, driving, taking a shower, taking a bath. We could just mindfully do things where we're stopping and slowing and being more consistent in our lives and allow it to matter instead of running around trying to multitask. Because the truth is, multitasking is not very successful for most people. Building in a routine where you're caring for your own emotional, physical well-being, getting yourself physically stronger, mentally more aware and awake and alert, and planning and committing to that, right? If you have a significant appointment for a doctor, you probably keep that, most people. Do you commit to and keep the appointments in your life that matter for you in terms of self-care? Many people don't even make those appointments. Maybe I'll go to the gym today. Maybe I'll go for a run. Maybe I'll reach out to a friend. How about committing that, cultivating that, those relationships with people and with yourself regarding what matters? Here's a critical piece, and this is a great book called The One Thing, Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results by Gary Keller. Say yes to scheduled time for yourself. Say no to other events that can get in the way. As soon as you say yes to something else, you've said what? You've said no to yourself. So say yes to what matters to you. And it's actually not selfish. You're impacting yourself negatively if you don't say no to those other things. You have to be able to prioritize yourself. What do they say when you get on a plane? Yes, it's probably been a while for most people. You put the mask on yourself if needed, if there's a change in the air pressure. You put it on yourself so that you're in a position to then help others. You need to be able to have self-compassion first before you can show that compassion toward others. So what gets in the way? Saying yes to other people, other urges that you might have, other values. You think about those values, that battery before that we looked at, that there are some things you can do with others. You can go for a walk with a significant other, with a friend. You could exercise and listen to music. You could exercise, as I like to do, and listen to an audiobook, okay? But truly, can you be working and exercising and with friends and with family and be spiritual and have lifelong learning and having a good meal all at the same time? No. If you are, you're probably not present with most of those things that matter to you. So sometimes we can combine a couple of values, right? Going on vacation with somebody that matters to you. So you're exploring and you're with someone that matters. But in most cases, it's hard to multi-value, like it is hard to multitask. So we need to really be mindful of what we say yes to. And be careful about having the thought, well, I don't deserve time for myself. You can't afford not to have time for yourself, because that contributes to that burnout and that compassion fatigue. What about feeling guilty? I feel guilty that ... Well, guilt should be reserved for, did you lie? Did you steal? Did you cheat? If not, maybe you're just feeling a bit conflicted because I'm taking care of myself when there are other things I need to do. Well, figure out when you're going to schedule those, because if you're not in a good place, you're not going to be very successful at taking care of the other things or taking care of other people. What about, but I'm so tired, but I'm so sore, but I don't think I'll do a good job? Maybe you could replace the but with and. I want to run and I'm tired. I want to help these students and it's going to be a difficult day. I want to be as successful as I can returning to the classroom, and it's going to be challenging at times. The and almost allows you to take that with you instead of the but stopping you in your tracks. So you can, somewhat tongue in cheek, you can be the but police, right? So we can notice ourselves and notice among others when that happens. I'm sure you've been at meetings like myself where there are a group of people and we're talking about strategies or talking about some way of dealing with a student's behavior or some change in the school or in the program or in the district, and someone says, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it'll work. For what reason? Sort of the naysayer. I believe, you know what, we're going to run through walls. We're going to go through the highest, over the highest, fences. Don't tell me no. We're going to figure out a way to make this work. And if you tell me we absolutely can't do it, then let's figure out the best alternative. But if we're going to start with, but we can't do this, we're not going to get very far. So if it's yourself that's saying it, how well is that working? And change that but to an and where you can. Have some boundaries. So if you're trying to attend to self-care, be mindful about what else gets in the way. Emails, notifications, text messages, other calendar reminders because you've double booked yourself, people knocking on at your door. So think about, what do I need to do to insulate myself so that I can take care of what matters to me right now? I look at it as like, all right, if I'm running, tunnel vision, I'm running, whatever else, that needs to happen later. Yes, of course, emergencies do show up and we do have to attend to those based upon valuing it in that moment. But otherwise, this is my plan. I need to plan it at a time that's not going to conflict and move forward with that, even though I might have some thoughts that might get in the way. Am I perfect? Of course not. Am I striving toward that? Of course I am. But we have to have self-compassion there too, noticing that I don't always run every time I intend to. And I keep working on it, not but, and I keep working on it. Working with a therapist. So sometimes it can be so significant that we're struggling so much, not able to turn off the struggle switch, where working with a mental health professional may be helpful to deal with the burnout and compassion fatigue. And that can help you to have a much greater level of awareness, help to work toward what matters to you even more. Interestingly, Stanford University some years ago, about 13 years ago now, they developed the Educators for Care program, established to enhance the development of medical students as skilled and compassionate physicians. So they identified that, in fact, medical professionals, not surprisingly, like every other profession, because they care a heck of a lot, they're going to have some dings to their compassion. So they have a formal curriculum aimed to foster the development of what? Compassion. Compassion, advocacy, responsibility, and empathy. They call it care. So each medical student who's incoming is matched with an E4C faculty who serves as the teacher, mentor, colleague for the duration of their time at the School of Medicine. Pretty cool thing, right? I think we'd all like that. Someone to guide us and mentor us so that we can continue to be as compassionate as we want to be and can be. Taking care of myself doesn't mean me first. It means me too. So what can you do, as we're going to wind down here in a couple minutes, and then we'll allow for a couple minutes, if we can, for some questions, which you should be able to put in your Q&A if you haven't already done so, and we can try to grab a couple of those. So take a deep breath, identify what really matters to you, look at what you've been doing that's working and not working, and has that become a part of the problem? Remember, your thoughts are just that, they're just thoughts. And you can make a choice that I'm going to do my best to accept those difficult emotions, that stinking thinking. I can make a choice to move toward that direction of what matters to me. Stay positive, because that's difficult, right? And thinking about the discomfort, that I don't want that to be the cost and getting away in the way of what matters to me. I want to keep moving forward. Here are some examples of the but with and that I mentioned before. So I want to educate my student, and they don't seem to be receptive to what I'm saying, instead of but. Remember what you wrote down on that piece of paper from the beginning of the webinar? You've been sitting figuratively and literally with that discomfort throughout the time I've been speaking. When you leave, you're going to be walking, maybe eating, talking with that discomfort still with you. You haven't gotten rid of it. The discomfort is still there. You've made room for it somehow, not rejecting the reality of your thoughts. You may not have thought about it much over the last hour now, but you haven't gotten rid of it truly, the thoughts and feelings. And you've been able to move forward, hopefully with this webinar rather than checked out an hour and changed before. But it's been at a more workable distance. Instead of right here, it's been in your pocket, or it's been on your device, it's been on your phone, what you wrote down. This is the essence of psychological flexibility and self-care and self-compassion. You put it in a place that's more workable for you without getting rid of it, without tackling it, without battling it. Now I want you to consider what are the next meaningful self-care steps that you can take while being willing to experience that discomfort. So you know what that discomfort is. You wrote down what's the reason that you're struggling. What are you struggling about? What's the next self-care step that you can do with that? How else can you allow yourself to move forward while noticing that that discomfort is there? So I want you to take a moment here and write, what is the one thing that you can do after leaving this webinar that will make a meaningful difference in your personal and professional life? That's it. Write it down. Put it in your notes section. Put it in your calendar. I prefer you to actually write it in your calendar because I want to know when you're going to do it. You decide, when will you do something after leaving this webinar that matters to you, that allows you to move forward toward what you've identified that you care about, turning off that struggle switch, showing more self-care, consistent with something that matters, teaching, connecting in relationships, physical or emotional well-being. Is it calling a therapist, getting to the gym, going for a run, reading something you've been meaning to read, reaching out to somebody you've had struggle with over time, doing something different in your field? I don't mean leaving your field necessarily, but doing something different that's going to matter more in your classroom, being more effective in your role as a social worker, BCBA, psychologist, LDTC, what have you. What will I do? Schedule that now. And then do it when it shows up, and don't allow the no's to get in the way. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion, as the Dalai Lama says. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Sounds like the same thing, huh? There's some resources at the end that you'll receive, again, this whole PowerPoint, and I hope that you find that those materials are helpful. With that, we welcome questions, comments people may have. And I know I didn't give you a lot of heads up in terms of putting anything into the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A. With a couple of minutes left, I'll just keep talking for another minute or so, and then I'll throw it back to Denise. And if we get some questions, great. One of the comments, I want to bring this back to ERI, emotional regulation impairment, which we see with many of the students in the ERI program, formerly the EAGLE program at the DLC, is that students bring what we all refer to as the, affectionately, the baggage, right? That students have lots of baggage that they bring from prior schools, prior districts, their home, foster homes, multiple caretakers. We all have various baggage that we carry with them, right? And leaving the baggage at the airport doesn't work too well. Trying to leave it at the prior school or the home doesn't work too well. That we all bring that with us, whether we choose to or not. It's really, what do we decide to do with that? And one of the things that we try to help the students with at the ERI program at the DLC is help them to gradually notice that. And they're carrying it with them already, but helping to change that relationship with that baggage. And there's a lot of trust issues that exist for many of our students. Trust issues because they haven't felt that they've been, or really have not been in truly engaged, connected relationships with caretakers or educators. And it's not necessarily anybody's fault. We could place blame on various people, but really the reality is that it's very hard to form relationships. And when children demonstrate significant behaviors, it's a lot harder to form and maintain those effective relationships. So gradually developing that through trust, unconditional positive regard. That means non-contingently giving a great deal of praise, helping students to be in a position where they're experiencing early and consistent success. And these are some of the tenets that we talked about in our first webinar on emotional regulation impairment strategies. But you can recognize hopefully how critical this is for showing self-compassion and compassion toward others, is to avoid judgment of others, but to put them in a position, and I should say, and to put them in a position to be able to succeed, and allowing ourselves to have the reality that we can bend, but we're not broken, and we can keep moving forward. So if you do have some questions that you didn't have an opportunity to throw into the Q&A today, you can feel free to email me. Once you get the copy of the PowerPoint, you'll see my email on the top there. And if you didn't catch all of the beginning, if you're interested in learning more about the DLC's Emotional Regulation Impairment Program, which is moving to the Warren location, please reach out to Mars Union Jointure Commission, and they'd be happy to provide you information and give you a tour to get to know a bit more about the program, to consider that for a student. So I want to thank Denise and the DLC for the opportunity to present the webinar, and all of you for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selbst. I already have my stuff in my calendar now. So I did a few things from the rest of the week. So that's great, especially with the long weekend coming up. Very nice. Thank you so much. I want to reiterate everything that Dr. Selbst has said. Thank you for joining us this morning. You will be receiving the PowerPoint from this, as well as a brochure about our ERI program. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.